Good evening. You're watching the news at 7:30 on ATV. I'm Emily Su.
And I'm Edna Tse. Here's a look at tonight's top stories.
40 arrested in clashes between police and protesters at Tamar, while High Court grants clearance injunction.
Siwalang says he doesn't want to force clearance, but warns protesters not to mistake tolerance for weakness.
Finance Minister warns of economic impact, while pro-government lawmakers demand immediate action to end protests. Authorities are bracing for more violence at government headquarters after clashes that broke out last night continue this morning between police and protesters at Tamar.
Police arrested 40 demonstrators and at least 17 officers were injured during repeated attempts to keep them off the main road outside the chief executive's office.
While student leaders vowed to continue their campaign, Leung Cheng-yin warned them not to mistake tolerance for weakness. Scores of police officers charged down Longwa Road outside the government's Tamar headquarters at around 7 this morning to disperse pro-democracy protesters who had occupied it during a night of chaos. Police hosed demonstrators with cold water for the first time. When water didn't work, they went back to their batons and pepper spray. Police continued to force protesters off the road and push them towards Tamar Park, leading to more chaotic scenes. Many were subdued and arrested. The crowd eventually reached the Tamar footbridge above Harcourt Road and Connaught Road Central, the main protest base. The area became crammed with protesters refusing to budge. This led to another round of clashes. Frontline reporters were not spared by police. Protesters eventually retreated to Harcourt Road. There was another flare-up when some angry demonstrators allegedly hurled objects towards officers stationed inside Admiralty Centre. Among those injured was a man believed to be an undercover officer who was knocked out cold. He and 2 others believed to be officers as well were apparently chased and attacked by protesters before they were rescued by reinforcements. While the government called them violent radicals, the protesters insisted they were only responding to police officers going out of control with their batons. Federation of Students leader Alex Chow, who made the call for demonstrators to besiege the government compound last night, turned up in a bid to calm down emotional demonstrators. He later spoke on the main stage in the so-called Umbrella Square, dismissing claims that he was not at the front line when the rally turned violent. Chow apologized to those who were injured, admitting that his strategy to take over Longwa Road in the bid to surround the government compound had not worked.
We could, of course, say that we have done it for a short time of period, but ultimately, the occupiers, they are eliminated by the police to other spots. So we would say, the plan, it requires, and it has lots of room to improve, and it is, in a sense, it fails at last.
But the student leader claims some success in paralyzing government operations by stopping civil servants from going to work this morning. The central government offices were forced to close all morning and could only reopen after lunch. Civil servants had difficulty returning to work because of the new blockades. Electrical meetings scheduled for today also had to be delayed. This afternoon, Chief Executive Leung Cheng-yin condemned student leaders for the chaos, repeatedly warning them that public tolerance for the roadblocks and violence had reached its limit. He urged protesters to go home, stressing that his government did not want to be forced into clearing the area. Leung said he did not want to see students being arrested and getting criminal records that would harm their future academic and career prospects. But at the same time, he warned them not to mistake tolerance for weakness, stressing that police were more than capable of shutting them down. The government is refusing to say if and when it will clear the protest base on Harcourt Road and Connaught Road Central, but many demonstrators are worried it's coming soon and losing their resolve to carry on fighting. While they're complaining of a lack of a clear strategy by those heading the movement, student leaders have vowed to stay the course and urge them not to lose heart.
The High Court has granted an interim injunction to clear barricades from part of the main protest area in Admiralty.
But it looks like the court orders will not be carried out right away, as more legal procedures are pending. ATV's An Jiang reports.
Representatives of two subsidiaries of transport operator Kwun Chung Bus arrived at the High Court this afternoon to learn whether their injunction bid had been successful. The two companies, one runs school buses and the other operates cross-border shuttles, wanted the court to give them permission to clear parts of the pro-democracy sit-in area on Connaught Road Central, Harcourt Road, and Cotton Tree Drive in front of government headquarters. In a written judgment, Judge Thomas Au denied the school bus operator's request for an injunction as it could only prove it lost about $4,000 because of the protests. But he granted an interim injunction to the cross-border shuttle firm as it was able to prove that its business plunged by as much as 17% between September and October. Au said the protesters had caused a public nuisance and the right to demonstrate must be balanced with people's right to use the roads. The judge, who had earlier granted the injunctions to clear the Mongkok protest site, added that bailiffs could ask for police help if necessary. The protest zone in Admiralty spans Harcourt Road and Connaught Road Central, from the PLA barracks to the police headquarters in Wan Chai. Today's injunction covers the eastbound lanes of Connaught Road Central, Harcourt Road, and parts of Cotton Tree Drive, but it doesn't cover the whole of Harcourt Road, where protesters have been camping out. It's still subject to change because the judge has asked the plaintiff to submit more information to clarify the exact areas it would like cleared. Kwun Chung Chairman Matthew Wong said all supplementary information will have to be submitted by Thursday. Occupy protesters have vowed to file an appeal against the injunction. An Chang, ATV News.
Last night's clashes were some of the worst we've seen since the Occupy protests began at the end of September.
Police used plenty of force against die-hard protesters, escalating their campaign for greater democracy. ATV's Arthur Urquiola reports.
The first major confrontation erupted at around 9:30 last night as protesters swarmed onto Long Wah Road in a bid to surround government headquarters at Tamar. Riot police swung batons with full force at protesters, some of whom pelted them with all kinds of objects, and glass could be heard breaking during the chaos. Police used one of the regular tactics, hosing demonstrators with a pepper spray solution. Protesters were seen being dragged to the ground and having their hands bound. Some of them wheeled out carts with bricks, but these were seized by police. Labour Party lawmaker Lee Chuk-yan was seen in the thick of action, trying to convince police and protesters to stay calm. But officers continued to lay into the demonstrators with batons, pushing them to the ground and beating them. There was more violence as they tried to stop demonstrators from taking away metal barricades. Some of them scolded officers.
Your duty is protect citizens. And not doing this.
Dozens were injured in the clashes, and some were seen being treated for injuries by first aid teams at the site. Many complained that officers were using excessive force, as even with helmets on, protesters were bleeding from head injuries. And the more force police used, the angrier they became. The security minister laid the blame squarely on the protesters.
I just quote one or two scenes. They gathered together, put up their so-called defensive materials, and then they say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then they charge the police squadron. This is systematic, with a command. Another example, they took loose barriers and then form a barricade and use that to push their line forward.
Officers were initially able to keep people away from the entrance of the Lunghwa Road tunnel. But the demonstrators eventually forced their way onto the road, blocking traffic on the key artery from Kowloon to Hong Kong Island, running past the chief executive's office. As the crowd spilled out onto both traffic lanes, police chased them into the underpass. Protesters at the front lines fastened together metal barriers and began a new standoff with officers. The demonstrators tried to push their way through using the barriers, as well as homemade shields of wooden boards and cardboard boxes. It didn't last long as police beat them back and eventually removed the new barriers to clear the road again. But at around 3 a.m., demonstrators rushed onto the road again and started barricading it. But this time, officers didn't try to stop them right away. That occupation lasted until 7 a.m. Arthur Urquiola, ATV News.
Financial Secretary John Tsang is calling protesters ruffians who will cause long-term damage to the local economy.
Tsang also cautioned that economic growth could be lower than the revised forecast of 2.2%, a warning that helps send local share prices plunging. Here's An Zhang.
There was a grim warning from John Tsang today as Occupy protesters continued to block roads. John Tsang said small and medium-sized enterprises, hotels, and the catering and transport sectors have suffered losses since the protests began in late September.
My biggest concern is really for the middle and longer term. If the occupation were to continue, no doubt our international image could be seriously damaged, which could lead to the investment confidence running down. And if the instability were to continue, that would also affect pay level as well as new job creations.
Tsang said the government will monitor the impact of the demonstrations and take measures where necessary to help affected people and firms.
I feel that this sort of organized movement is totally irresponsible and is totally sort of ruffian type of attack needs to be reprimanded.
Turning to economic growth, Tsang noted that the city's gross domestic product rose 2.7% in the third quarter, but with uncertainty over the political crisis, full-year GDP could be lower than the revised forecast of 2.2%. The finance minister noted that although there was a rise in the number of tourists last month, the number of non-mainland visitors had fallen. Tsang went on to warn that the rule of law is one of Hong Kong's core values and will be very difficult to heal if it's damaged. The ongoing protests and Tsang's warning that GDP could fall below 2.2% sent local stocks reeling. The Hang Seng Index suffered its biggest single-day loss since February, plunging 620 points, or 2.6%, to close at 23,367. But there was some good news on the retail front. Retail sales in October, when the protests were in full swing, had been expected to dive. Instead, they rose 1.4% from a year ago as $38.3 billion flowed into tills across the city. Ann Chang, ATV News.
Still to come on ATV's main news tonight. War of words between London and Beijing after British lawmakers banned from Hong Kong.
One man killed in clashes between rival football fans in Spain.
All about science. The brilliant beaked whales make a world of sounds. Scientists find the communication secret of the biggest mammal on Earth.
It's the equivalent of trying to listen to somebody shouting in the bottom of a well or a pit.
How can ship construction contribute to better safety?
Nowadays, you can get dry food from the ship to the life raft.
Scientists figure out ways for surviving an emergency. Science on the Seven Seas, tonight at 10. Current events, controversial issues, in-depth accounts of the latest news and happenings that impact us all. Get to the heart of the matter. get the inside story. Friday night at 8. Want to discover the latest trends in Japan? Learn Japanese and feel the pulse of the vibrant culture at JP Time TV, Sunday night at 6:25. They can drive you nuts. From the most powerful roaring on earth to the sexiest bodies you'll ever see. They're surely every man's dream. Drive it tonight at 8.
尊重好簡單，就係互諒互讓咯。
大家有唔同諗法，但互相包容。着得型啲都冇問題啊！
唔該你後生仔，唔介意我論盡盡喎。
最好真係了解我咯。
Want to be respected? Try respecting others first.
冇嫌我笑得大聲喎。
All about sacred. For a woman, a mum, a wife.
It's fine, Chloe. I will be okay.
Having breast cancer could be desperate.
We need to get them all in the same room, sit them down and tell them together, which is what we did.
Staying positive, and super nurses can help to get over the illness.
Reconstruction changes a lot of ladies' lives in a very positive way.
Super nurses, tomorrow night at 10.
Police and government officials have blamed protesters for the violence overnight and this morning, accusing them of carrying weapons to attack officers.
And pro-government lawmakers are demanding immediate action to stop the protesters once and for all.
After the violence last night and this morning, Security Chief Lai Tung-kwok complained that the civil disobedience movement had long abandoned its promise to stay peaceful.
I think what happened last night fully demonstrates that it has far, far away gone beyond what they have declared. The police, after repeated warnings, have to take resolute actions. They have no choice because it is their duty to restore law and order.
Health Minister Ko Eng-man also condemned the violence and expressed regret that dozens had been injured. Pro-establishment lawmakers came out in another show of solidarity to condemn the protesters and their leaders.
I think yesterday it is quite obvious there's a hidden plan. They have all kinds of, we call it violent weapons like nails, like those ashes, they said, and also the bricks, that actually can cause serious harm to the police and also other demonstrators. So we actually do not see it really from the start. They would like to keep it as a peaceful attack.
The Beijing loyalists urged the government to shut down the protests.
So I think the government also should take immediate action. The longer it drags on, actually, the more harm it may cause both to the Hong Kong general public as well as to those young demonstrators.
They also complained that student leaders had been using the LegCo building as a base to break the law, thanks to the support of the Pan-Democrats.
It goes beyond the category of visitor, because those leaders, they already publicly said in the TV and broadcasted that they call for the unlawful and damaging movement to start. And we could not, as legislative councillor, harbor or accommodate these people to stay in the building and continue to give instructions to this unlawful act to continue.
League of Social Democrats lawmaker Leung Kwok-hung admitted that he had invited student leaders into the building. Leung insisted he had done nothing wrong and would continue to invite them into the building if needed. Police put the blame entirely on the protesters for the violence.
It is obvious that these troublemakers have committed the violent act in a premeditated and organized manner. You can all see from television broadcasts that the violent acts of these rioters have deviated from their proclaimed no violence, no charging of police, and no vandalism principles.
They showed weapons found in a Tai Kok Chow flat yesterday to support their claims.
Police seized 3 modified air guns and a large number of makeshift wooden shields. There are reasons to believe that this equipment will be used in the illegally occupied areas. In the operation, police arrested 4 males and 1 female for the offenses of possession of firearms without license and possession of instruments fit for unlawful purpose.
Ho said some of the makeshift shields used by demonstrators had nails and screws sticking out, which wounded officers in the chaos. He called for evidence when asked about news footage showing police officers swearing at protesters, taunting them and clapping when they were beaten. China has banned a group of British lawmakers from coming to Hong Kong to assess the city's relations with its former colonial ruler.
The move comes as China accused foreign countries of being behind the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. ATV's Joyce Wu reports.
Relations between Britain and China have taken another blow as pro-democracy protests continue in Hong Kong. In the latest case, British lawmakers planning to visit the city have been told they will be denied entry. The Chinese embassy in London gave no reason, but Beijing is clearly annoyed with the British Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. The committee is looking into relations between Britain and its former colony, where pan-democrats and students are demanding that no restrictions be placed on candidates for the next chief executive election. Committee members want to study the situation in London's former colony 30 years after the Sino-British Joint Declaration. But China insists that other countries have no right to meddle in its internal affairs. Last week, Conservative MP Richard Graham, who previously served as a diplomat in China and Macau, was refused a visa to Shanghai after voicing support for Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement during a parliamentary debate. In October, he raised concerns about possible breaches by Beijing of the Joint Declaration and said London has a duty to uphold the principles of the pact, which included guaranteed free speech and freedom of assembly. When Graham was denied a visa, other MPs in his group decided to call off a 3-day visit to China. In the latest case, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Richard Ottaway, accused Chinese authorities of acting in an overtly confrontational manner. He said immigration is a matter for Hong Kong, but it was quite clear that Beijing had imposed the ban. Ottaway expressed concern that Beijing would also get involved in other issues and questioned China's commitment to the one country, two systems principle. He said he would call for an emergency debate in Parliament on the situation today. Last month, Hong Kong's last colonial governor, Chris Patten, appeared before Ottaway's committee and rejected Beijing's assertions that London should stay out of Hong Kong affairs, citing binding agreements signed between the countries. A spokesman for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office described Beijing's decision as regrettable. But Beijing hit back, saying it has every right to decide who can enter Hong Kong, as it's responsible for the city's foreign affairs. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying also accused British lawmakers of being overtly confrontational by insisting on going to Hong Kong despite Beijing telling them that it opposes such a visit. Joyce Wu, ATV News.
Time now for sports with Bo Lang.
And another dark day for football, Bo.
Indeed, clashes between rival Spanish fans claim a life. One of the saddest days in Spanish football. That was how officials described the tragedy that occurred before a La Liga match in Madrid. Fans of reigning Spanish champions Atletico Madrid and Deportivo La Coruña clashed before their match. During the skirmishes, a Deportivo supporter was thrown into a river near Atletico Stadium. He died in hospital after he was pulled out suffering from cardiac arrest, hypothermia and head injuries. 11 other people were injured and 24 arrested. Football officials condemned the violence, but had no